Dionisio Aguado's new guitar method, first published in Spanish as the Nuevo Metodo para Guitarra in Madrid in 1843, is an epoch-making work in the history of the guitar. Here are set out and discussed all the technical issues which concern modern players: correct hand positions, angles of the fingers, ornamentation, special effects, always with an insistence on the one factor which, more than anything else, has enchanted today's audiences: the magical sound of the guitar, its very special tone quality, and how to produce it. It is the most detailed and thorough of the early 19th century methods for guitar. And more than that, in it and in its earlier versions, Aguado sets out and codified for the first time the guitar technique which we use today. Because of the book's continued relevance, as well as because of its functional position in the history of guitar technique, it has seemed desirable to make it available in English. The text from which it has been translated is Aguado's genuine and complete original text. The point is worth emphasizing, for although generations of guitarists have known that Aguado's method for guitar was famous, and although Andres Segovia has frequently recommended it to students, there have been several utterly different books on the market, all claiming to be Aguado's method for guitar. It was impossible to know which of the modern editions, if any, was authentic. The early editions themselves were confusing because of the many versions, editions, issues, and translations which were published in the author's own lifetime and which had not been distinguished by bibliographic work. Because we did not know which version was written at what date, it was impossible to assess accurately Aguado's achievement or his place in history, and certainly impossible to use his evidence accurately in any historical discussion of the guitar. Nor were reliable editions of his pedagogical pieces possible because their sources were not properly distinguished. Now the bibliographical research has been done and is presented in this introduction for the first time in print. The text in this book is that of Aguado's own final edition and represents his fullest and final reflections on the subject of guitar technique without the interference of any later editors or players. Dionisio Aguado was born in Madrid in 1784 and died there in 1849. He devoted his entire life to the guitar. Unlike his older Spanish contemporaries Sor and Moretti, he is not known to have composed any music whatsoever that was not for solo guitar. No choral music or piano music or ballet scores like Sor, no songs or chamber music like Moretti, nor even any guitar duets. Nor did he take any active part in the tremendous political events of his day, whereas Sor and Moretti were both commissioned officers in Spanish forces and fought in the battles against the invading armies of Napoleon. Aguado merely retired with his mother to his property in Fuenlabrada, a village outside Madrid, and devoted himself to the study of the guitar. The result is a certain lack of breadth of vision, but on the other hand, an intense concentration on detail. No writer before him, or indeed it is probably true to say after him, in any country or at any period, studied and analyzed guitar technique to such an extent. And there is no doubt of his success. The technique which he set out is, in all its essentials, identical with that which has been generally adopted today. The Escuela de Guitarra, Madrid, 1825. The essence of his teaching is already present in his first method for guitar, the Escuela de Guitarra, which he wrote in Spain in the early years of the 19th century and which was published in Madrid in 1825. 3 copies of it are known to survive. This early work is already a full and complete method for the guitar and represents an entirely new approach to the instrument. Aguado well understood this when he wrote in its prologue that the style of guitar playing had greatly changed in the recent past, and that a treatise to deal with the modern style was needed. Also, of course, the instrument itself had recently changed, from the Baroque guitar of the late 18th century with 5 double courses to the basically modern early 19th century guitar with 6 single courses. Aguado's Escuela is the first comprehensive method for the modern type of guitar, Not only that, it is the first method for the instrument which is recognizably modern in its approach. It addresses issues which are still with us today, such as the differences in sonority between a note on one string and the same note on other strings at different frets, which he calls the equisonos. Whether to play with nails or not, the angles of the left and right hands, and so on. Clearly it reflects new ways of thinking and a new methodology of teaching. To judge from the layout of the book, pedagogical ideas from outside Spain must have reached and influenced its author. Nevertheless, it does stay in a number of respects within a native Spanish tradition. For example, in that as well as technique, it teaches the elements of music as applied to the guitar, something which Ferrandier had done only a few years earlier in 1799, when Aguado was 15 years old. The Escuela de Guitarra has 6 plus 29 plus 111 pages and 441 paragraphs of text. There are 131 lessons, each usually with both text and music. The music pieces are at first short and then longer as the book goes on. Altogether, there is a great deal of explanatory text. There are also 14 exercises for agility of both hands and 30 studies. 16 of the 30 studies also appear in the 1843 method and have been published in modern editions, but the other 14 do not, and as far as I know, have not been published in modern times. Noteworthy pieces among these 14 unpublished studies include number 7 in C minor and the very long and developed number 29 in D. The book, however, is far more than a collection of music. It is essentially a text which deals at length with all aspects of guitar technique. Its writing is clear, its music plentiful. It occupies a highly important place in the history of the guitar and must be studied by anyone in the future who attempts to write any kind of history of the instrument at that period or who is interested in historical performance practice. No modern edition of it has yet been published. The Escuela de Guitarra, according to its prologue, was preceded by a collection of studies composed in 1819 and apparently published in that year or shortly after, perhaps in 1820. Aguado writes, "The lack of a method caused me to compose in 1819 a collection of studies which has been out of print for some time now, but when I published them, I did not realize that they would be difficult to understand for lack of a method." No copy of this collection of studies is known to survive, but from the description of it, it is clear that it contained only music and little or no text. And Aguado goes on to say that most of the studies contained in it were later also published in the Escuela. So now we know that some of Aguado's famous studies for the guitar apparently were composed specifically in Spain in 1819. But a collection of studies is not a method. The two things are completely different, and Aguado in the passage quoted about made the distinction perfectly clear. A tendency among modern editors, therefore, to regard Aguado's studies as constituting in themselves the essence of his method must be firmly discounted. There is no question at all, but that a method, according to Aguado himself, is a text which discusses the technique of playing an instrument. Thus, when we speak of Aguado's method for guitar, we must mean one of these versions of his method, which consists of an extensive text with music that illustrates and complements it. The Escuela de Guitarra might have had small influence on the world had not its author traveled to Paris in 1826 after the death of his mother in 1824. There he met Fernando Sor once more. They had met in Spain many years earlier in 1813 or before, certainly benefited from wider musical horizons and made himself and the Escuela known to a wider circle. He composed many new pieces and played in a number of concerts. He was to spend some 11 years there. In Paris in 1826, there was published a second edition of the Escuela de Guitarra with the same title and still in Spanish, and with practically no changes in Aguado's text. Also in Paris in 1826, there appeared a French translation of the Escuela under the title Méthode complète pour la guitare. The translations were done by Aguado's friend, lover of the guitar and military man François de Fosse, lieutenant colonel in the 23rd French Regiment of Line. Again, there are practically no changes in Aguado's text. However, Fosse had contributed to the 1825 edition an appendix on the art of modulating on the guitar, and this appendix was enlarged in the second edition and translated into French in its enlarged form. We may guess that this French translation of the Escuela was the book which made Aguado best known at this time. French methods for the guitar were highly popular, and this translation would certainly have reached many of the guitar aficionados abundant in Paris in those days. The Nouvelle Méthode de Guitare, Op. 6, Paris 1834 or shortly before. The next method for guitar by Aguado is a completely different book. It's called the Nouvelle Méthode de Guitare, Op. 6, and it was first published in Paris by Aguado himself, in French. It is not dated, but there is evidence that it first appeared in 1834 or shortly before. This book is shorter than the Escuela de Guitarra and has a different aim. The Escuela had been a large-scale undertaking aiming to teach the whole of guitar technique as it existed at that time, and as Aguado himself had developed it. It also taught the elements of music and provided much music for technical development. The new work has quite a different purpose: to enable the amateur to play agreeable pieces in a short time. This is set out clearly in the second paragraph. In writing this work, I have set out to offer to those who love the guitar the possibility of playing agreeable pieces within a short time. And he says that using this book, satisfactory results can be obtained in as little as 6 months. The book has 64 pages and 172 paragraphs. It begins with a preface mostly devoted to recommending the use of the tripod. Then comes 28 lessons, each devoted to a particular technical subject, and 34 exercises, which from lesson 15 onwards may be played along with the lessons. Of the 34 exercises, 12 for the left hand and 12 for the right hand and 10 for both hands. Nothing is said at the beginning about whether the book is intended for self-teaching or for use with a teacher, but in paragraph 96, a decision is specifically left to le maître, and so it seems that Aguado had a teacher in mind. It is specifically a simple method. There are instructions clearly set out, short pieces designed to give practice and technique, and commentaries on each piece. Altogether, the Nouvelle Méthode de Guitare, Op. 6, is a good simplified method. It has interest for anyone studying Aguado or his history of the guitar, but it is not a major work, as was the Escuela de Guitarra. None of the music, as far as I've been able to ascertain, is the same as any in the Escuela. The Nouvelle Méthode de Guitare, Op. 6 was published in a closely corresponding Spanish translation called Nuevo Metodo de Guitarra, Op. 6, by Campo in Madrid in about 1840, and then the same Spanish version was published in a new edition, entitled this time simply Metodo de Guitarra, Obra 6, by Schonenberger in Paris in about 1844 or 45. So the second of Aguado's methods for guitar exists in 3 editions: the Nouvelle Méthode de Guitare, Op. 6, in French, a Spanish translation of the same book called Nuevo Metodo de Guitarra, Op. 6, and another edition of the same Spanish version under the title Metodo de Guitarra, Obra 6. As a kind of addition to it, there appeared in about 1837 Aguado's Valse caractéristique servant de complément à la Nouvelle Méthode. This consists of a preface and 38 simple waltzes. Also, in about 1837, there appeared another simple pedagogical work, La guitare enseignée par une méthode simple. After an introduction, there are 22 lessons, each consisting of a waltz occupying 1 page, with discussions of various techniques on the facing pages, and 6 exercises. The music quality is not high. The Nuevo Metodo para Guitarra, Madrid, 1843. Now we come to the only version of Aguado's method for guitar which is at all familiar to modern players, the 1843 Nuevo Metodo para Guitarra, which we have translated into English for the present edition. In about 1837, Aguado returned from Paris to Madrid, and it was there that 6 years later he published this 3rd version of his method, an entirely new book. Even though it does incorporate some elements from the 2 earlier ones, When he wrote it, he was 59 years old and had spent a lifetime devoted to the guitar and above all to its techniques. Whereas the Escuela de Guitarra, some 20 years before, had broken completely new ground, and whereas the Nuevo Metodo de Guitar had been designed for beginners, the Nuevo Metodo para Guitarra of 1843 is a synthesis of past experience, a long and mature work written after years of teaching and playing. In it, we find Aguado's teachings set out in its fullest form. It gives us the latest thoughts of someone who had devoted his life to the study of the guitar, thoroughly discussed and set in order for anyone to learn to play and make best use of the instrument. It is a different work from either the Escuela de Guitarra or the Nuevo Metodo de Guitar. The printing history of the Nuevo Metodo is somewhat complex. Although the book is a unity from a musical and didactic point of view, typographically it falls into two parts. The first part is paginated, 1 to 56, and the musical examples are in a very strange looking musical type. In his preface, Aguado explains that the printer of the book, who was also named Aguado, possessed a fount of music type which he had never used, and that the printer's son, Eusebio, a pupil of the composer, put the music in this first part of the book together. The second part of the Nuevo Metodo has music of a much more conventional appearance, a completely different typeface for the text, and new pagination. This second part has the plate number BC1, from which one may suppose that it was engraved by or for the publisher of the book, Benito Campo. On the title page of the earliest known issues are the words grabado y estampado por Lothar. This can be interpreted as meaning either that it was Lothar who created the music type of the first part, which was put together by Eusebio Aguado, or alternatively, that it was he who engraved the second part for the publisher Benito Campo and added the plate number BC1 for his employer. The title pages of the earliest known issues indicate that the book was sold en las guitarrerías de González y de Campo y en el almacén de música de Lothar. A later issue omits the words grabado y estampado por Lothar and impreso por Aguado and is for sale only at Campo's shop. In a later edition published by Faustino y Asenjo, Madrid, the first part was completely reset and re-engraved, doubtless because of the eccentric appearance of the music in that part of the original edition, but the second part was reprinted from the same plates as the first edition. Curiously, Faustino y Asenjo nevertheless did not delete Aguado's words about the strange appearance of the music, even though that note was completely irrelevant now that they had re-engraved the music in question. Subsequently, the method went through various new editions and issues published in Madrid by Faustino Fuentes, successor of Fuentes y Asenjo, and by José Campo y Castro. To the Nuevo Metodo para Guitarra should be added the 16-page appendix to it, which according to a note printed in the appendix itself was in the press at the time of Aguado's death in December 1849. It contains some further thoughts and reflections and is included in the present edition. It is found bound with the Nuevo Metodo in some copies. A Paris edition of the Nuevo Metodo para Guitarra, still in Spanish and with the same title, appeared in about 1844. The publisher was Schonenberger. The plate number S1320 shows that it appeared shortly before the Schonenberger edition of Op. 6, which was discussed above, whose plate number was S1334, and whose title was simply Metodo de Guitarra, doubtless to distinguish it from the present edition. Perhaps Schonenberger decided first of all to print the 1843 text, and then sales may have encouraged him also to publish very shortly afterwards his edition of the Spanish version of the simpler Op. 6. Schonenberger's edition of the Nuevo Metodo para Guitarra was reissued in about the 1880s under the title Metodo para Guitarra by the Paris publisher Lemoine, with a new title page but using the same plates. So the final version of Aguado's method for guitar exists in two editions. The Nuevo Metodo para Guitarra, Madrid 1843 and later editions and issues, and the Nuevo Metodo para Guitarra, Paris, Schonenberg 1844. and it's reissued from the same plates as Metodo para Guitarra, Paris, Le Mans. In addition, there is the Appendice of 1849 or 50 to be added to the 1843 method, and in fact, in some copies, bound in with it. Aguado's new guitar method is one of the several famous methods of the early 19th century, the principal others being those by Carulli, Carcassi, and Sor. Giuliani wrote no method. Full bibliographical research remains to be done on Carulli and Carcassi, but it appears that their methods first appeared in 1810 and 1836 respectively. Carcassi's is fairly long, contains some attractive music, and is simply written, which is doubtless why it has been reprinted and translated so often. It has nowhere near the intensity of Aguado's. Sor's Méthode pour la guitare was first published in French in Paris in 1830 and is a fascinating and highly intelligent work which deserves study by anyone interested in the instrument. But Carulli's is the only one of the three which predated Aguado's Escuela of 1825, and though it is clear from the Escuela that Aguado knew Carulli's music, there is no evidence that he was influenced by Carulli's method. It seems that Aguado was above all a product of the Spanish tradition. He knew the music of Baroque Spain, was taught by the Spanish Cistercian monk and court favorite Miguel Garcia, otherwise known as Padre Basilio, and must have known the music of Moretti and the early guitar music, such as the sonata, now known as Grand Solo, of Sor. And there is no doubt that that education and intellectual curiosity were acquired in Spain. It follows then that the honor of establishing the foundations of guitar technique which we still use today belongs firmly to Spain. Firstly, in its extraordinarily detailed coverage of almost all aspects of the technique of the playing the guitar. Anyone who studies the book and successfully works his way through it will probably have received the most solid grounding in technique that any book can give him. It may seem surprising to some, but it is true that all the essentials of today's guitar technique are already in Aguado. No major changes have taken place since his day. Hand position, angle of the fingers, type of stroke, use of the nails, arpeggio technique, special effects, all are there in terms which are directly relevant to the modern player. Apoyando, for example, is discussed, see lesson 50, in which Aguado insists that the right hand finger after striking 2 strings shall come to rest on the 3rd. In some respects, Aguado is even in advance of us. Thus, in study number 8, bar 3, his fingering indicates inexorably the use of the little finger of the right hand. The theory which is sometimes heard that guitar technique was fundamentally revised and altered at the end of the 19th century by Tárrega and others is now shown not to be true. The new guitar method is important historically because from it and from its earlier versions we can date so many aspects of guitar technique, but above all and perhaps unexpectedly, it is important because it emphasizes the very aspect of the guitar which today, through concerts and records and especially through the playing of Andres Segovia, has caught the imagination of millions of people. The beauty of sound of the guitar and how that sound should be achieved. I decided that I should concentrate principally on the best method of producing full-rounded, pure and agreeable sounds, writes Aguado. And again, the guitar has its own particular nature. It is sweet, harmonious, melancholy. Its sounds are susceptible to modifications and combinations which make it mysterious and very appropriate for melody and expression. Throughout the book, it is clear that the quality of sound is a primary concern of his. He himself, it appears, produced a very beautiful sound. Here is the historian Baltasar Saldoni describing his playing. I was awakened by music that seemed celestial, and I wondered what instrument it could be that charmed me so. Such were the sweetness and softness of its sounds and harmonies produced by the manner in which its strings were struck. Aguado does not merely recommend full, beautiful and varied sounds on the guitar. He tells you how to achieve them, and above all, they are achieved by a certain kind of right-hand finger stroke at a certain angle, with a certain degree of strength, and with a certain position of knuckles, and with a certain very exactly described combination of the nail and the flesh of the fingers of the right hand. Certain modern writers have got this wrong. They say that whereas Saw played with the flesh of the fingertips, Aguado used nails, as though Aguado played only with the nails and not with the fingertips at all. This is incorrect. If we look at what Aguado actually wrote, we find that he specifically says that the string should not be struck with the nail alone, because then the sound would certainly not be very agreeable. His way of achieving a beautiful sound on the guitar is to strike the string first with the flesh of the fingertip and then immediately with the nail. The string is first played with the fingertip and then the string is immediately slid along the nail, paragraph 37. Now this is not a point of small interest, it is of the greatest importance to the history of the guitar, because the quality of the sound produced by the instrument through its appeal to concert audiences is largely responsible for the guitar's present great success. Andres Segovia, who has enchanted so many people with the beauty of his sound, uses just such a combination of nail and flesh and has refined and developed it for his own use. We can now show that the original idea of using a combination stroke for the sake of beauty of tone, the root from which today's sonority has grown, is not an invention of this century. We find it already in Aguado, a Spaniard who developed his ideas in Madrid before he ever left Spain, and so it is true beyond a shadow of a doubt to say that the magical sound of the classical guitar today has its roots deep in the history of Spain. There is one respect in which Aguado's idea did not catch on. That is the use of the special device which he invented, the tripod. He originally called it the tripodison, but later abandoned that name. This was a three-legged wooden stand placed in front of the player, with a metal section attached to it, in which the guitar was firmly held. It offered two advantages. One was that the player did not have to support the guitar, so that his fingers and arms were completely freed for the tasks of stopping and plucking the strings. And the other was the guitar could produce the fullest and richest sound of which it was capable, because it was freed from anything touching it, which might deaden any of its vibrations. Aguado's tripod should be seen in the context of the many 19th century devices and changes in instruments, a vast numbers of them, some of which succeeded and are still with us today, and some of which did not. Aguado's invention, even though it seems that it may well have worked, died with him. Today, some people are experimenting with it once again, with new ideas and with notable success, but meanwhile, the reader, if he wishes, may ignore the references to the tripod in this book. Aguado specifically says that everything in the new method is perfectly valid, whether one uses the tripod or not. It appears that Aguado was also involved with another physical aspect of the guitar, a new type of bridge. Today we almost universally use this type of bridge, into which is inserted a piece of material to serve as a kind of nut, rather than the older type of bridge prevalent in the 19th century and earlier. In paragraph 27 of the new method, Aguado says that he believes that it was he who invented the modern type of bridge in 1824, that is to say, while he was still in Madrid. Research has still to determine whether or not this claim is true. In the Escuela of 1825, page 25, he says simply that this type of bridge is de invención moderna. Whether or not Aguado was the inventor, this at least establishes that by 1825, the modern type of bridge was in existence. The new guitar method throws interesting light on early 19th century performance practice. In paragraph 295, Aguado discusses the ways in which music can be varied on the guitar, and he takes as an example a bar from Saw's Fantasia, Op. 7. Today, few players would think of varying a note of so complex and formal a work. Yet we know that in the early 19th century, the art of varying complex compositions was far from dead, and Aguado's example shows us some ways in which that varying might be done, and by inference, apparently was done at the time. Players may wish to start from paragraph 295 and explore the applications of some of Aguado's ideas to other early 19th century guitar works. Another aspect of performance practice, a surprising one, is the appearance in paragraphs 280 to 81 of 22 Preludes, which says Aguado in his preface, can be performed before beginning a piece of music. This tradition of playing a short quasi-improvisatory piece before a more formal one is of course very old, going back to the Renaissance and beyond, and its appearance here in a book published in 1843 is of the greatest interest. Again, readers may care to explore the use of these preludes in the way in which they were intended. In this edition, we have kept closely to the original 1843 text, using the copy in my own collection. That copy has a list of errata. We have incorporated these and have also silently corrected some dozen other errata which were discovered in the course of translation. Our printer has taken over and used some of the actual designs and ornaments which appeared in the original 1843 edition. The music has been completely reset. The footnotes are Aguado's own, except those in square brackets which are ours. Spanish words have been kept where they are internationally known today as the normal terms for the techniques or sounds in questions, such as arrastre or campanelas, and in some other cases the Spanish words have been translated, but are also given in parentheses, where it is of interest to know the original term used, such as silenced sounds, sonidos apagados. In the music, the original 1843 text has been respected. Nothing has been added, nothing taken away. All fingering, phrasing, dynamics, metronome markings, and other indications are Aguado's own. Conventions of notation have been modernized and obvious errors are corrected without note. Otherwise, we have changed nothing and added nothing. To sum up, the picture that emerges from Aguado's various methods for guitar is that of a man who dedicated himself for many years to the technique and pedagogy of the instrument. Beginning his study in Spain during the political turmoil of the first years of the 19th century, he continued it during the calmer years that followed there, and later in Paris and back in Madrid. It was a collection of studies initially that preceded and gave rise to the first large-scale method, the Escuela de Guitarra. A simpler method followed in Paris, the Nouvelle Méthode de Guitare, Op. 6, and finally a few years before he died, he produced a synthesis of both of these methods and of his long experience in the Nuevo Metodo para Guitarra of 1843. There is no doubt that the three versions of Aguado's method, along with So's Méthode pour la Guitare of 1830, are the central texts for the history of the guitar and its technique in the classical period. But not only that, this great classical method has much to say to us still. It has influenced guitarists ever since it was first published, and there is no doubt that it will continue to do so. The present English translation of it will help to make this possible.